Peace, peace, peace. Welcome to another episode of Wild the Dome TV. Today, I have a very special guest. You've seen him on here, I believe, three times already. An author, professor, scholar, one of my favorite scholars, man. And it's always a pleasure to build with this brother, Dr. Gilmore. Thank you for coming through, man.
Hey, the pleasure is mine, man.
No doubt, man. We're just gonna, kind of build and see where the conversation takes us, man. There's a lot going on. And, one thing that I obviously that's been in the news cycle is in Frisco, Texas. There's a black kid that allegedly stabbed a white peer at a track meet. And there are reports that are coming out that the white kid may have been the aggressor. But despite this, many people default seeing the young black kid as the violent one, as the one who can't control his impulses. It's not really fathomable to a lot of people that he could possibly be acting in self-defense. Um, can you just, whenever you see that, can you just speak about that some and tell me, like, what kind of goes into this? What kind of leads to, people automatically viewing this young brother as, an impulsive, violent young male, and there's no way that he could possibly be defending himself against white aggression.
Yeah, man. I seen that case, and I haven't seen all the details yet,
Hmm.
but it did seem like the kid was not the aggressor. It's a tragic situation, but
Yeah.
he definitely didn't start it. But I think these are just the types of ideas you see when it comes to violence and viewing armed black men as threats. Just going back to slavery, like one of the first things that was done was to disarm, you know, male slaves. I mean, you see this as like a control tactic going back to the 1940s in American military, but to disarm them because they're seen as threats, and very culpable for doing all types of evil things. Um, so you see that type of language. I think it's interesting too. People talk about like impulse control. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
that's a
I've seen that a
very
lot. I've seen that a lot with this case alone.
uh,
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's very interesting. Like when you read early anthropology, you see impulse, the control of impulses being was one of the primary characteristics that distinguishes civilized men from savage men, right? So savage men didn't have a control of their impulses, and with those low impulse controls, they commit murder, mayhem, harm women, stuff like that. Some of these ideas are 400 years old, are still used to understand black men
Mm.
and
You,
black males in general.
yeah, you can see, obviously, it has been politicized. I think we kind of knew
Oh, for
that was
sure.
coming.
Yeah.
But one thing that I did see with my own eyes on several different articles and several different tweets by white nationalist influencers was this idea of young black men not able to control their impulses. And this is some 400-year-old race science, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
But it's still being viewed as legitimate.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A lot of these early ideas in anthropology have been rebranded, and are still with us in a lot of ways. The idea that black men are unintelligent is another one of them that you could trace back to like medieval thinking. They didn't call them black; they just called them savages or wild.
Mhm.
They're unintelligent. They're hairy. They don't shave. They're rude toward women. And we still see black men in like the social imagination of the nation as what distinguishes a human from a non.
Right,
The
right.
qualities the black men have are qualities that are beyond human.
Mhm. Mhm.
Humans have rationality. Humans have impulse control. They don't, you know.
Whenever we look at these old like, it's interesting, even when it comes to indigenous people, right? When you look at these the old art and literature and movies, always depicted as us against the savage. When I say us, I mean
Right,
white men. You know what I
right,
mean?
right.
But obviously, this has been used against the African as well. Um, Whenever all right, so how does this play out in real time as far as maybe even policy um or in school, in institutions, um people carrying these ideas of the black male or the savage male, and how does that create, or the realities that black men, indigenous men strive to navigate in this country.
Yeah, man. I think it informs like the actual segregation of the races, as you
Mm,
can see with Native American men and people on reservations and black men in ghettos. Some of the early justifications for segregation was protection of women, especially during Jim Crow, right? Protection of white women. So you have to build the space in a way that protects white women from savage men. Um, so I think you see like zones of space even segmented toward this, but I think the same type of logic plays out in particularly foreign policy, domestic criminal justice policy. So capturing young black boys before they turn into men who are criminalistic was the justification for the first juvenile rights legislation in America under the Juvenile Justice Act of 1974. And this was in like a direct response to the riots in the 1960s.
right,
Um, there's not going to be jobs for everybody. We can't allow these people to rape, rob, and murder, and so we just have to lock them up early. Even there's a really good book on it by Elizabeth Hinton. She shows that even when white children would get caught up in the system, it was reconfigured to make sure it caught young black boys
mm,
to put them in the system, and the reservation system and the prison system. I mean, it's really a reflection of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, you see the same type of justifications for the 9/11 wars, and,
yeah,
invading the different countries. You have to protect the women. The women and children are in danger because these Muslim men don't believe in sexual liberty or individual autonomy. And so you justify drone strikes on that. You justify drone strikes on countries you're not even into it with on
right,
paper. You know what I
right.
mean?
Got to spread that good old American democracy, right?
Right, right,
You mentioned something about, carceral state and how it was reconfigured for young black boys. One thing that you were having a discussion with you and a few other people, and I just thought was very interesting because I now see it uh, differently. In the book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, she obviously, when it comes to just pure numbers, as far as statistics of incarceration and how things like parole and probation are ways to keep you incarcerated without even being without
right.
being behind bars, and it's a lot of good information, and I feel like it's definitely a lot of value in the book. But the premise of this being the new Jim Crow is what the conversation was about. And you were, and you and a couple other brothers, I forgot who it was, were speaking of like, this is not the new Jim Crow, right? This is this is a reflection of internal colonialism and the colonized
Right.
status of Africans in America. Can you speak to that some? Because I think that's a powerful idea. Because again, in Jim Crow, there wasn't any black judges, black prosecutors, black
Right.
police. You know what I'm saying? But if you can, just
Right.
speak to that some.
Yeah, yeah. So the conversation was about like the new Jim Crow prison system and this interpretation of the prison system as not a mechanism of warfare, but a mechanism of capital accumulation and profit. And that interpretation really doesn't stand up to the scrutiny of the facts, right? So, like you mentioned, Michelle Alexander's work was a political prisoner whose writings I've always read and liked a lot, named Aruba Ben Wahad. He was the first one I seen take issue with this. But
Mm,
when you read his entire essay in the Journal of uh, Prisoners on Prisons, he says, look, you have entire dissertation theses and philosophical arguments explaining to you the relationship the prison has to the social control of the black population, like figures like George Jackson. These are not the figures that inform um, Michelle Alexander's work and her
yeah.
theoretical perspective, right? And the reason it doesn't is because it would indict her as a federal prosecutor
Mhm,
and a bourgeois black person
mhm.
in the control and maintenance of the system. And these theorists like George Jackson or Robert Allen, they're they're drawn from Malcolm's analysis of America as a neo-imperial country or a neo-colonial country. And they interpret this process happening in Black America in line with Africa and the rest of the formerly colonized world. And what this entails in the colonized world abroad, in the Black world abroad, is Black presidents, ostensibly independent countries, representation in international democratic institutions like the UN, but economic control and dependency on former colonial nations, right? Well, within Black America, a middle class, Robert Allen's central thesis that a middle class was created to accomplish this process within the United States. They were mostly college students, and there's three primary areas, which is education, welfare, and the criminal justice system, right?
Mhm.
So Michelle Alexander, if they're correct, right, Michelle Alexander is a living testament of the process being complete, right?
Right.
But she doesn't use internal colonialism theory,
Mhm.
right? She views it as an unfortunate pattern of circumstances. It's reflective of a system, but it's not an internal colony. It's something else.
Right.
Right? But the new Jim Crow idea just,
It's something that
I
can be
mean,
fixed.
right, right, and I think it just misrepresents like the emergent role of the prison in socially engineering Black America after the
Mm,
70s.
mhm.
I mean, Jim Crow rates of imprisonment for Black men compared to white men was about four times. Black men under Jim Crow went to jail four times the rate as white men. After Jim Crow in the 80s and 90s, Black men's rate had jumped up to seven or eight times.
Right. It was more people in prison than
How
there
do you
was
explain that?
during slavery in
Right,
1850.
this after the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you can't explain that unless you understand that prisons emerged as a central tactic in technology of counterinsurgency in the 50s and 60s. And it was seen as humane.
Mhm.
And so instead of engaging in mass killings, we're going to engage in mass detention. And this will lower the civilian body counts. It allows for more intelligence collection. Um, and it's non-lethal.
Yeah.
And you see the prison emerge as a warehouse for Black men. Um, as an insurgent class within the body politic of America, right? They can't be
Mhm.
allowed to destroy it like they did during the summers of the 60s. They have to be detained preemptively. So you get the Juvenile Justice Act, the creation of the youth justice system, and then the building of the super prison complex.
How does adding in what happens now with like damn near modern day convict leasing where they have these prisoners actually, making money for these, Fortune 500 companies, not really seeing much of that. And is that, because I don't know the numbers on how much money is made in this, for these companies or for these prisons. But how does even that idea of using it? to exploit, labor of Africans, like they've always have. Like, how does that add into the picture?
Yeah, well, I think that's a big part of it, right? But I think that's just part of the story.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think at the at its core, what you got is an issue of control of people.
Hmm. Hmm.
And once you have control of those people, I mean, you can get resources from them. On southern states are notorious for this. Tennessee, close to maybe a decade ago now, about them making saving millions of dollars by using prisoners to build roads, things like this. When I lived in Florida, you would see prisoners cutting grass on
Right.
the highway all the time.
Didn't they use some in the wildfires in Cali recently?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. They use them in the wildfire. I've seen them use them to engage in destroying buildings and
Mm.
like exposing them to asbestos and stuff like that
Wow.
that other people wouldn't
Yeah.
do for paid labor. So I think the labor exploitation is a huge part of it, but it's about socially engineering the population. If you're in prison, according to civil society, it's like you're functionally dead.
Mm. Right.
Right? You make no money. You're not interacting with any other major institution. Prison is like the military. It's what sociologists call a total institution. Inside of it, every aspect of your life is managed within it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That type of surveillance, that type of management of hearts and minds, that's what's at stake from the lens of like or how I think about internal colonialism and counterinsurgency, because that's really what the goal is to gain intelligence, learn the population, manipulate the population towards your ends. If you want them to work.
Yeah, right, right. Well,
You know what I mean?
it's pretty much that control is what's central. That control and that power over them is what's central to the motives, right? Like whatever you
Right.
want to use them for, you can use them for. But this
Right.
control, this power, understood, understood. Kind of getting back to the savage male or savage black male trope, right? When we look at the Panthers, right, and these are, we're talking about Huey and Bobby in the beginning, who met at Merritt College. They were, reading things like E. Franklin Frazier and Du Bois and like, just some heavy stuff, right? But they have, in a lot of cases, been reduced to just black dudes with guns that were, hyper with hyper masculinity and violent, and they're never looked at in a lot of cases for the intellectual traditions that they furthered. When we talk about Michelle Wallace and the book Black Macho and the Myth of the Superwoman, how did this kind of in a lot of ways, because also obviously you have like, COINTELPRO and, the state attempting to repress anything positive being said about the Black Panther Party. But how did this book, like Black Macho and the Myth of Superwoman, kind of assist in making the Panthers look more, I guess, misogynist than intelligent revolutionaries?
Yeah, yeah. No, that book is I would say it's still at the heart of modern black feminist historiography of black power. And really the Black Lives Matter movement itself
Mm.
really assimilated the history and historiography that comes from the book. I mean, it's really establishes like how you understand black history within black studies departments. Now I think why that is a longer case of subversion.
Mhm.
Like we talk about all the time, and I really don't think most people have read the history of the discipline itself of Black studies.
Mhm.
And so they're not aware that the institutionalization of Black studies, which led to the rise of Black feminist criticism and fiction, was a product of a successful counterinsurgency. It wasn't a victory for Black people.
Yes, right.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And in her book, Wallace's book, I mean, it was promoted by a CIA operative. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
was heavily promoted, She helped with editing and things like this. Not only that, it was recanted, right? But his main position was recanted. The position being that the Black Power movement failed because of its internal sexism, its anti-female ideas and operations. But
Didn't it
I
even
don't know,
say
man.
like people like Angela Davis were just subservient women that were just
Right?
yeah like
Yeah, like Black women were given a subordinate role, or they had to choose their own way,
mm,
right? And
mm,
the author chose choosing her own way. She actually says nationalism, all nationalisms female, and so she offers a Black feminist alternative. Now, there's a lot of problems with the work that's been highlighted in the scholarship of Tommy Curry and other Black and study scholars. But I think, as far as the Black Panther Party themselves, what it has done is allow for a type of propagandistic interpretation of them
yeah.
around the ideas of Eldridge Cleaver,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
Listening to that debate with Curry and the other brother who his PhD as well, but
Right,
I was really tripping whenever they were saying that because he was trying to make the case that Soul on Ice was the Bible of the Black Power movement. I've
right.
never heard that in
But
my
yeah, but
life.
right, that's Jennifer Wallace, right?
Yeah.
That's Wallace's reading of the Black Panther Party.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And people just adapt it,
Mhm.
as if it's just true. But if you actually read, his position there, he's recounting a story about the past. So he wasn't in the Black Panther Party during that time, and it in no way reflected their philosophy, which was mainly authored by Huey.
Right.
So if you actually read, the debates they're having and the ideas they're putting forth, it's a really different view of manhood than you get from, the dominant academic histories. You know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, 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 for sure. Um, Whenever we look at the savage male and then savage black male, can you talk about how this just like this is a playbook that is used like internationally as well? It's not just used on black males and indigenous males here in America, but like one thing I kind of always go back to just because it was so eye-opening for me personally was just the trope that Palestinian men were R-wording women and children and
Right,
beheading people and all of this kind of stuff, and it's used to justify genocide, right? But
right.
can you talk about like this being like this savage male trope militarily being an international type of thing?
Yeah, no, I mean, look, the savage male, the idea of the savage male is like at the deep roots of Western thought.
Mhm.
It's one of the basic assumptions that drives colonialism, in the Caribbean islands, under the guise of spreading Christianity, right? So barbarous races and barbaric males don't have Christ.
Mm,
Then is used to justify race and a civilizing mission. So because they're savages, white populations are bringing civilization, which is ultimately going to save the women. So
right.
there's an implicit gender dimension to this all the way through the history of counterinsurgency. I mean, I read a recent paper, man. I was just taking notes on it the other day, but
Mm,
really you can look at American foreign policy, and the author mentioned this, that one of the main justifications for spreading democracy around the world is gender,
mm,
meaning the protection of women and
mhm,
women's rights.
mm,
And so that this dynamic that racialized men are particularly savage and need saving by white liberal democracies or white regimes, it's always been a basic dynamic in the history of democracy and its particular form of social engineering people through pacification. That's what they call it. But it's
yeah,
basically socially engineering non-Western, non-white people to Western institutions.
right. So yeah, right. Because you see pictures of like that are used as tools of propaganda that like
Yeah,
I've
did you see
seen.
those pictures I shared last week? Like where H.R. McMaster, the Colonel. He was working for Donald Trump, showing pictures of Afghanistan women in
Yes, that's what I was about to
miniskirts.
bring up. Like,
Right, right. Okay, we
right.
we, we track it. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And so
yeah.
can you talk about like and so this idea that you know I would use the term women of color for lack of a better term,
Hmm.
or women in the global South, right, or in oppressed
Right,
communities. Um, can you talk about like like how women in Algeria, well, revolutionary women in Algeria, like not all populations of women fell for this, right? Like
right.
there were some that was like, nah, we see what you're trying to do.
No, absolutely, right. But there's a projection and there's
Hmm.
an aspiration. I think that's the most important part. Not necessarily that the women go for it, because it's not always true.
Hmm.
Um, but there is a projection from Western civilization that goes all the way back to Rome, really, that non-white women and women of the East desired Western superior manhood.
Mm.
So they're sensual, they're more sexual, and they're very submissive toward the dominance of the white male. I mean, this goes back to like um, the Roman who married Cleopatra. Like
Hmm.
it's very deep rooted.
Yeah.
You can find Roman art when they conquer a place. Rome is masculine, and the place they conquer is a woman,
Mm.
especially when they're
Wow.
non-Western.
Right. Right.
So there's a type of gendered thing. I mean, this plays into the overall thing, right? So the men of these non-white races are savage because they have less man,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
They're savage because they're feminine, they're non-patriarchal,
Wow. Right,
right?
right. We were talking about that the other day. Like they were like European colonizers came to certain places in Africa and maybe even North America, and they saw the way uh, uh, these women were being treated with a different sense of equality that they've ever seen before, and they said that that was a weakness of ours, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, Thomas Jefferson justified settler colonialism by saying that, look, the native men are so savage they allow their women to do tough work,
Wow,
right? And this is evidence that they don't have patriarchy, should be colonized, right? So
wow.
the colonial endeavor is projected as not only making the savage male effeminate in a way, but also appropriating the women and protecting them.
Mm, mm, mm.
So in modern parlance, the women are civilians
Yes.
and the men are seen as automatically combatant. And this is why when you read Galula, right, Galula's going to tell you to win a counterinsurgency, you protect the civilian,
Right. Right.
right? You don't attack them,
Hmm.
you subvert them and co-opt them.
Yeah. Because that was Galula. He reiterates throughout the whole book about the need to win over the population. Because it's not a traditional war. It's
Right.
and the ways in which you win over the population are very interesting. There are just certain people that you have to kill. You're not going to be able to
Right.
win over from, and it's I think again it's something that a lot of people. I know there's a lot more talk about counterinsurgency now than it's ever been, but it's very important to understand counterinsurgency, to understand what's happening and what has happened to us, and others within the global South as well. Like whenever we talk about,
Yeah.
um, whenever we talk about COINTELPRO, and we talk about Coin, why, like, where do you think the discourse should be when it comes to these things and how we should look at our uh, the history of our Black radical traditions, right? I know and we'll get into it in a few. Matter of fact, hold that thought. I kind of want to get into a little bit of predictive analytics, because I know that's something that you have studied a lot and have written about. And one thing that struck me is like how far back some of it goes, right? Because I was reading that 6 months after Malcolm died, during the Watts riots, but even before then, during the police oppression in Watts and other black neighborhoods in California, that the police chief or the governor or police chief stated that they used crime data to justify targeting Watts and other black neighborhoods. Like, so just thinking about where we are with technology now, but even them attempting to use data to justify, uh, the police state and the apartheid state that they would have our communities in. Like, where are we now with predictive analytics and predictive policing? And where do you see it going?
Yeah, man. I think the value of this stuff, to start off is just an understanding like it's literally the same logics. It's like updated logic of slavery.
Mhm.
When I was doing my dissertation work in Scotland, man, I really was fascinated by this link I found when it comes to technology. Like counterinsurgency was unique because the savage threat led to certain types of magical thinking
Mm,
about the enemy and the white
mm,
mind. And to get rid of this magical, nebulous foe, they invented new weapons to do it. So they started using holotips. They developed the howitzer machine gun. They started using chemicals like lyddite and putting them in bombs and dropping them from the air to kill
mm,
the savage. Um, but they also created computing technology to catalog traits about the enemy threat and
mm.
predict its emergence, right? And I think that process that started in the '60s, you've seen it in COINTELPRO actually. Like Derubo talks about it a little bit, and there's this historian, Kenneth O'Reilly, has a really good book called Racial Matters.
Mhm,
And in it, he talks about how the FBI had this index called the Rabble Rouser Index,
mhm,
or it was renamed the Agitator Index. And it was a computerized index system,
mm.
right, to help them catch and profile Black nationalists,
Wow. So some of
right?
this
I mean,
first
this is everybody
technology,
from
so some of
Graham.
this first technology was used on us,
Yes.
not yeah,
Yeah,
wow,
yeah,
wow.
not abroad, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a really good book by this researcher named Sarah Shoker.
Mhm,
Her book is on drones and the military age male as a target in conflict and counterinsurgencies.
mhm.
And it's really good because what she'll show you is that even the military age male goes back to Vietnam,
Right.
right? And so we know the way these technologies are adapted domestically and abroad, right? And you see the same type of signifier being used in COINTELPRO, right? The Black Messiah.
Mm.
The Black Messiah is not a pregnant Black female,
Right, 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 right.
right? There's four targets for it. Malcolm X is one, Martin Luther King is the other, and then there's Huey Newton.
Mm.
That's what we know, and then Amiri Baraka as well, right?
Mhm.
All Black males,
Yeah, right.
right? It's the same type of cognitive shortcut, right? But with predictive analytics, I mean, what's happened with the emergence of new data is that, and I talk about this in my dissertation a little bit, but like there's an epistemological problem, meaning that knowledge itself is militarized, right? New disciplines get created, new fields and schools of thought in sociology, new methods in criminology, new methods in anthropology. And they converge in these new body of ideas and fields in data science, computer science, artificial intelligence, all of this stuff. You see the investment of all of this stuff for behavioral engineering.
Mm.
You know what I mean? And I mean, we've just come full circle today where, I mean, just look at Silicon Valley. Like Facebook and these internet companies are basically extensions of the military industrial complex.
Right. Right.
Look
Right.
at the behavioral and social engineering they're able to do, right? Making things go viral, driving discourse toward this topic or that topic, dividing people for elections and showing people. I think yesterday I was apologizing last month for showing people videos of people being killed, right? Just they can desensitize you to certain types of things.
Yeah.
Um, just through your phone. I mean, I was just reading this book, man. I mean, he basically said, like, look, Facebook itself is a brain tap.
Mm.
I
What do
mean,
you?
everything I want to know about you,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can find out through your
Yeah.
Facebook profile. And Facebook actively sells that data
Right.
to companies who are military affiliated, non-military affiliated. You know what I mean? Like I wrote about one system that was created in '07 by the Army called Conus Intel. It was upgraded into it's called IQs, ICEWS, the Integrated Crisis Early Warning System. It's basically a human radar system. It's controlled by the government. It takes in all Facebook posts, and online chatter, and media, and then it does what is called a sentiment analysis for the angry people,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And help you
Wow.
target those people just through your digital data footprint.
These could be possible insurgents.
Absolutely,
That's what they're saying. Right.
right,
Um.
absolutely.
Wow. Wow. Now what's this? What now? Aren't they? All right, so like when we look at it, like at predictive policing, like what goes into that technology as far as how they can say, this group over here, I mean, they haven't committed the crime yet, but and they're the most likely to do such and such right now. Like how does that even work?
Yeah, I mean, look, all of it is based on the assumption, as far as the operational adaptation of it, that black people behave in a manner that's akin to a surgeon's abroad, right? So predictive policing is actually a company. It's
Uh-huh.
called Predpol.
Oh wow, what is it
One of the
called?
founder Predpol,
Okay,
right?
oh,
Predictive
okay,
policing.
all right.
Okay, one of the founders of the company is an anthropologist at UCLA.
Mm.
He got a government grant for comparing the behavior of gangs in LA and insurgents in Iraq,
Wow.
right? This is funded by the
Wow.
DoD, right? So like this is
Wow.
what I mean, like this basic dynamic. If you understand that the white mind constructs and manages black people like insurgent foreign populations, the application of this technology will make perfect sense.
Yes. Right.
And so what
Right.
they give to the system are data sets.
Mhm.
These data sets are composed of previous arrest records.
Mm.
The problem with that is previous arrest records are biased because the police are racist.
Right.
Right? So what you
Hmm.
just did is offload that bias to an AI system that's going to tell you go to the black areas.
Right. Right.
Even if you don't do personal data, it'll tell you go to this area. They got place-based algorithms and person-based algorithms.
Mm.
Right. So they could just say, look, show me the places where it's more likely to be a crime. And it'll show you places where black people live.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
You show person based is going to pull up personal data sets and tell
That's
you to target certain people.
that's kind of why I brought up like Watts, just because of the governor saying that they're using crime data to justify targeting black neighborhoods like this before the riots, right?
Right.
But you are the data you're using is coming from
It's
you
biased.
already. Yes, you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like we were talking the other day, is like there's no the AI isn't biased, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
it's
People who
you.
build it are biased. Right.
Right. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think
Right.
it's important to look at it that way because when we look at it that way, we can see it being used as a tool and being weaponized against a certain group of people, right?
Right.
If AI is not sentient. It's a tool.
Right. Right.
It's a tool people use, right? And what's very interesting is like all of this tech, like all of this technology that we talk about, from the internet, from computers itself, from AI, like these motherfuckers had war in mind, and and control and power in mind when creating this stuff.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
I mean, look, I mean, this goes back to like even these disciplines I was talking about. Like, it wasn't just crime data that started to be collected in the 60s. I mean, this is the same time the first drones was used to collect information in Vietnam, right? For the purposes of they called it bugging the battlefield. But the goal was to figure out the patterns of the group to properly manipulate that group into where you want them to be. That created an entire new field of data analytics and data science and
right?
computer science, and now there's AI degrees,
Yeah,
right? But it's all with the DNA of the military in mind.
right, right. I think
You know what I mean?
that's definitely that's I think we I'm glad, I appreciate you driving that point home because it's important how people look at and approach this technology and understand like it's not all just for commercial use. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah.
There's more
It's a
nefarious.
contradiction in all of it. Yeah, it's a
Mhm.
contradiction in all of it. Like most psychology research can be adapted to manipulate people in different ways. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So a lot of the technology is dual use,
Yeah,
and it's not that it's just dual use. Like it was developed and pioneered by the military for military use,
right.
and happened to have these dual uses too.
You know, it's always funny whenever I read these articles about these CEOs of these tech companies not allowing their children to use the technology that they create, promote, and sell. Like, yo, you know what I'm saying? What is this for?
Yeah.
Um, that's very telling to me. Like, what are
No,
you?
absolutely.
You're not necessarily the creator of it, but you're branding this technology and selling this technology and talking about how great it is and how useful it will be. But your family is not allowed to use it. Like that. That says a lot, man.
Yeah, and there's a lot of gaps with like privacy law.
Hmm.
There's cases where, I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, but like, the right to be forgotten. Some
Mm.
countries,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
used to do stuff on the internet, make certain videos, and you don't want those a part of your public persona anymore. You have the right to have those deleted off
mm,
of Google. America
mm.
doesn't have laws.
Right,
Right? So
right.
if you do something publicly, and then you want to go be a teacher, people can look that up.
Yeah,
What's
right,
your name? You know what I
right,
mean? Like there's
mhm,
no right to make that company let go of your data.
right, right.
Once they got it, you gave it to them by signing up.
That's what they say, right? They said if there's no if there's no subscription, you are the product. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Why is well? I guess is this part of the reason, like surveillance, predictive policing, advertising. Is this part of the reason, like why data is such a commodity to these tech billionaires and military and all of this?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And data is information, man. Like the information is key to counterinsurgency.
Right.
You know
There's
what I mean? Like,
intelligence and operations, right?
right,
Yeah.
right, right. And you need information to have good intelligence, right? To predict where your enemy is going to be, how they're thinking, to properly manipulate them, their behavior, decision making, and impose your will on them.
Mm,
You need to know more about that. I mean, um, this dude, I mean, he has this quote in here, man. I'm reading this book right now,
mm,
Roberto Gonzalez,
mm,
about 100 pages in. But I mean, he has this quote in here. I'll have to find and give to you, man. I mean, it's insane how much they know about people through technology. Like,
yeah.
a lot a
Yeah.
lot of people are skeptic about counterinsurgency. They say, "Oh, this stuff doesn't work." There's these technological evolutions, but at the end of the day, a lot of successful are a lot of counterinsurgencies are not successful, and I think to some degree that's true. But I think the creation of the internet itself. I mean, he has this. He was talking about Cambridge Analytica, and he has this warning that this deserves our attention because it points to a possibility for totalitarian institutions, not just governments, but corporations, political parties, religious groups, and other entities to have the tremendous and frightening capacity to mold the ideas, attitudes, and behaviors
Mm.
of audiences captured.
And
Right.
and Cambridge Analytica, weren't they? Didn't they come in a fire for, I guess, having something to do with manipulating elections or
Right.
information about candidates?
Right. Exactly. So they was manipulating, targeting people, bringing out racial biases in whites
Hmm.
to get them to come vote for Donald Trump. Right, in 2016. And it's interesting, it's a British company, but its
Mm.
primary investors are American billionaires.
Wow.
Right, so the whistleblower said that their goal was to create a right wing insurgency.
Right, right,
Right,
right.
and I mean that's just like that's what I try to get across sometimes, like that America as a power has mastered counterinsurgency to a degree that I think these people who doubt the efficacy of it just really don't appreciate
Mm.
the fact that technology like this has been invented, the fact that these tactics can be used through shell companies by people in the American ruling class to even socially engineer Americans themselves, it says something about an accomplishment of power
Yeah.
in the last 50, 60 years that you get from the readings and the writings of Huey P. Newton that I
Mm.
think a lot of people just haven't really sat with and considered. You know,
Mm. Why do you think people like Huey, George Jackson, why do you think that? I mean, obviously we take them serious, but as far as, you know, others in these spaces, whether they're white or black, who are attempting to understand some of this phenomenon, don't take George Jackson or Huey as serious as they should.
yeah, I think it's two things, man. I think for one, black men are not really respected as thinkers.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, we're respected as sloganeers.
Mm.
You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? People don't really respect ideas that come from us in the
Yeah.
same way.
Right.
But another aspect of this, I think, is just the reality that most liberal arts narratives and hegemonic disciplinary ideas, they are such because they're extensions of the state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
Darub bin Wahad talked about it in a Proud Flesh interview, but he said, look, COINTELPRO was an entire network of repression that includes academia.
Mm. Right.
And it's no accident that the Black Panthers are seen as generally dishonorable in
Mm-hmm.
academic circles and
Mm-hmm.
non-intellectual. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, just think about it. The first intellectual history of the party's ideas was published in 2013,
Wow. Wow.
right? And this is
Mm.
like 5 to 6 years after
And
an
then,
article is
and then wasn't
published.
there a book that was kind of shitting on him and criminalizing the shadow of a panther or
Right,
something?
right. But this was a history of Huey Newton,
Mm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily the Black Panther Party. This is 1994 or so,
Okay.
right after Newton dies. And the
Mm-hmm.
problem with that book is that it takes a lot of right wing journalistic speculation.
Mm-hmm.
And as a Black author, he's able to launder that as truth
Right.
by just citing those. They were usually considered neoconservative, right wing rhetoric. Well, now it's legitimized by a legitimate Black
Right.
professor, right? So you see those narratives with Huey. And then later on, I want to say '07. So about 5 years before our first book is published about the party itself, Huey Newton is compared to Osama bin Laden, right?
Golly.
So I mean, the dominant narrative that they harm women and that they're terroristic, they don't come out of nowhere. There's this guy, Grant Thomas. He calls discourses on gender and sex in the academy part of the COINTELPRO canon,
Mm.
right? And I like that little title for it because I think it really helps you remind us that the narratives that we face in academia are not here on accident.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Right?
Right.
Black
Right.
studies is not formulated on Black feminist assumptions accidentally.
Right. 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 Um, when you look at these white philanthropists bringing billions of dollars to these Africana studies programs, and you look at the curriculum, like you have to understand that these two things are connected and related. It's not a, it's not it's and then whenever you think about, um, it's just it makes me think about the origin of Black Studies, from Nathan Hare and the students at Cornell, and even before then, when it comes to like the Harlem History Club and the foundation that they created, right? But how far have we gone from where Nathan Hare was at San Francisco State to
Completely
now?
gone. Completely. When you talk about Nathan Hare, you talk about a sociologist,
Right,
right?
right, right.
I mean, you have debates now with Black studies students and scholars who some consider psychoanalysis and literary interpretations to be more sound methods than sociology.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
Like that's how far
It's
we've
crazy.
gone. Like Black nationalism,
It's a bad
was at the
word.
heart of, yeah, that's a bad word now, but it was at the heart of Black
Right,
studies.
right.
And it didn't get replaced because somebody asked for Black feminism. It got replaced because major foundations
Mm.
like Ford. There's a really good book by this sociologist last name Rojas,
Uh-huh.
and it's called From Black Power to Black Studies.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
he shows how like he interviews people who were doing the grants at Ford,
Mm.
and they say that they funded the Black Studies programs that were the least nationalist,
Wow.
right? Especially during through the 80s, was Reagan attacks colleges. You can't survive, you can't bring in your own money.
Right.
And the nationalist programs couldn't attract grants like the
Wow.
others could,
Wow.
right?
Wow.
And those grants are given to manipulate the discourse of the field. What
Right.
do Black studies scholars talk about now? Black feminism and gender.
Right. Right.
That's not it's
There's
not accident.
there's no Pan-Africanism, Black nationalism, or even Leninist critique of
Right.
capitalism.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
That's rare. That's rare. I mean, look, you seen the same thing happen at the height of the in the start of the post 9/11 wars in the war in
Mm.
Afghanistan.
Mm.
Um, the role and position of Afghan women became an object of obsession in
Yeah.
America.
Right.
Um, the news reports exploded, and even the president's wife. I think it was the first time a president's wife ever addressed the nation. Laura Bush addressed the nation. What was her
Mm.
topic? Women in Afghanistan,
Right.
right? Women, right? The women. I mean, Fanon talked about this, but like the woman became he calls it a talisman.
Mm.
The main theater of French counterinsurgency operations, the woman,
Mm. Yeah.
unveiling her,
Yes.
freeing her,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so you see this same type of logic uh, interwoven in Black studies, right? Nathan Hare never got a tenure track position in San Francisco State Black Studies Department.
Right.
George Mason, the Black Panther, who started the insurgency with the Black students, getting into fistfights with the school newspapers and shit like that. This guy got arrested and expelled from the school,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? But in these same disciplines, we were told that Black men are too centered. We shouldn't talk about them at all, and that they ingest the ideas, and they did all of that struggle to try to be white men and harm their own.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
mean, it's
That's
like
crazy. But
it's
again,
180.
but like so, and then, like this thing about military age males. I remember whenever you did the panel with Imam Jalil Muttaqin, um, and there was a veteran in there that was corroborating what you were saying. It was like, look, it was like we round up all the military age men, and then we attempt to like win the women over to the way we see things, to these
Right.
Western values, this Western
That's right.
culture, right?
And you
Like
give them things, right? You give them
uh-huh.
health care, you give
Mm.
them jobs.
Now, is this pacification?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? But pacification is just a fancy word for assimilation,
Hmm.
right? And that's why you can't. I mean, you see this debate going all the way back to the 1890s with this colonel, this British colonel Charles Cowell. He's the first one to really write a formulated doctrine of savage warfare,
Okay.
drawing on the experience of the British and the French explicitly. And says, look, you have to mix your force with, he calls it moral influence.
Mm.
And that process of moral influence or shaping the ideas of a people and selectively killing the ones who don't buy into your formula.
Right.
Together, that's pacification,
Mm. Wow.
right? It's not just killing, but it's also integrating them into your institutions.
Right. Right. Right.
You
Right.
know,
I think.
jobs and the labor market is a great way to do that. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a great way to do that.
Mm. How would things like, when we look at counterinsurgency, um, how would when we look at Nixon and his promotion of black capitalism, to slow down black power movement and or any type of black nationalism ideas, would that be a form of counterinsurgency to inject these ideas within the black community as a means of liberation when our movements, our radical movements, saw capitalism, saw imperialism as the enemy?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Like, you've seen this even in like the Philippine American War, which was a counterinsurgency. They created markets
Mm.
for the Filipino women to go into,
Mhm. Wow,
right,
wow.
and sell their goods, right,
Right,
and they
right,
protected those markets with the army force,
right, right.
right. No, I was talking about Robert Allen. Robert Allen says, look, there's a black middle class created. They come mostly from the students, and he calls them for shorthand an MBA class, Masters in Business Administration,
Mhm.
right?
Right. That's
Markets, business,
right.
right?
Mhm.
Markets, right?
Mhm.
This is a great investment. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? So they will, black capitalism is a reflection of that's the ideology of that black bourgeoisie,
Yeah.
that you can make it in the system if you
Hmm.
follow the rules, go to school, right? That doesn't imply destroying property.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
Right?
Right. Right.
Doesn't imply seizing the technology from the ruling class that's working with them in the system.
I even saw a video the other day of it was a writer and organizer, I believe, but he was just talking about even the idea of um, even the idea of financial literacy was a form of counterinsurgency because it does not address obviously any uh, institutional issues within capitalism, but it puts the onus on. It promotes bootstrapism, right? And a system that relies on competition, and everybody ain't gonna win. Everybody ain't gonna make it. Um, Even like the it's very interesting to think about that, even that being a form of counterinsurgency, because again, when Galula talks about what what rallies the people around the insurgents cause is the fact that they have a cause
Right,
that the people relate to,
right,
a cause that they can see, a cause that they understand. Whenever we look at what all of this redirection has done to our community, man, I don't even feel like I feel like we lost plot of the cause a long time ago, man, because
oh yeah,
these groups that I see that are coming out, they're assimilationist groups, these other people. I don't know. I just don't know what half of these people are talking about. But it's never any ideas of black nationalism, Pan Africanism, anti-imperialism, anti-capitalism. I feel like ain't shit changed for us to stop to have gotten off of that, right?
right.
But when you when you talk about when we talk about like revolution, insurgency, like can you just kind of go into like cause and also propaganda and how it kind of goes together?
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that point by Galula is really important, man, and it makes me appreciate like the fact that groups like the Panthers and Newton actually created an oppositional philosophy
Hmm.
to liberal democratic capitalism. If you read Huey's dissertation, he tells you explicitly he understands the philosophy of the party and intercommunalism to be directly opposed to and an ideological rival of liberal democratic capitalism.
Wow.
But we don't
Wow.
have thinkers that are that bold anymore,
Yeah.
right? And what's happened is because of the predominance and hegemonic status of theories like feminism, we've been unable to recognize that at the end of the day, feminism is not a counter Western ideology. It's an extension of Westernism. Um, but I think when you look at propaganda, man, I mean, it goes back to what we was just talking about these Silicon Valley. I mean, this dude, I like what he calls it Pentagon West.
Mm.
That's Silicon Valley, man.
Wow.
Like
Wow.
the people who
Pentagon
control the
West.
advertisement you see,
And
the
bro,
people who manipulate the discourse and debates.
and they said Americans see anywhere from 3,000 to 10,000 ads a day.
Man, and look, and this is my thing. Like when you look at the history of counterinsurgency, man, Caldwell, there's a really interesting article in that guy Caldwell I was just talking about, the British general, and he cites a Russian. Um, and the Russian says, look, the goal is not just to control the people, but it's to seize them by their throats and their imagination.
Damn.
That's counterinsurgency,
Mm-hmm.
seizing the minds of the people, and who sees more propaganda out of all Americans, right? Black Americans.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? We consume more media, we see more advertisements, and we use more social media than other groups on average.
That's so interesting that quote because it made me think of I saw a poster of um, a woman at Palestinian solidarity uh, a Palestinian solidarity uh, encampment or protest, and she had a sign that like was I'm paraphrasing here, but the idea of the sign was imagine something bigger than just a black woman's face on imperialism. And she was talking
Right,
about Kamala Harris, right?
right,
But this sees them by the throats, sees them by their imagination. We can't imagine anything outside of capitalism right now. We can't
right.
imagine us having our own nation or Pan African solidarity or United States of Africa. We can't imagine any of these things anymore. It seems like, I mean, obviously there's always going to be a group that is on it, but at least then, like with different groups, such as the Black Panther Party and coming off the heels of um, the NOI and then Malcolm's OAU, and then even before then with
Yeah,
the UNIA, we had and we still had our imagination somewhat, right?
right,
And it just
right,
seems like now with you know this technology, this technology doing a number on our attention spans, being probably in like you mentioned the most propagandized era as in the history of the world just because of our access to information. We look at
right,
it as an access to information, but it's really them having an access to us.
right,
You know what I'm saying?
right. The
But
privacy we've given up is magnitudes greater
right,
than the information we get back.
right, right. No, and that's and I just think, yeah, I just want us to get back to seeing what the cause is because it's like so much discourse that we have in these spaces now is not really. I mean, there it's like taking a step backwards, right? It's like
Yeah.
shit that I
But I
put my.
mean, look, man, but like as a philosopher, this is why I find the revisionism that you get in the academy to be so dangerous.
Mhm.
Because what I get from my readings of Black Power thinkers is that the cause is humanity. That's
Mm.
what I learned reading Robert.
Yes, yeah, right,
That the
right,
cause that Black people are part of the human species,
Yes.
right? And that our cause is grand enough to be understood as a human cause,
Right. Right.
right? As the fate of civilization itself. That's what I got reading Du Bois.
Yeah. Right.
That civilization itself is staked on the destiny of black men.
Mm. Yeah. No, you.
Yeah,
It's
it's
kind of.
intentional.
Yeah. No, it's good. Hold on. Yeah, it's kind of. It's just breaking up again. No, but I got you. One thing that I found interesting is like a couple weeks ago, Trump said that they were releasing some JFK files, and I know you were kind of doing some digging around,
Oh
and
yeah,
yeah, like, but what you found is some, JFK
right.
targeting black revolutionaries, right? Can you talk about some of the?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I mean, but this goes back to these narratives, right? So the narratives you get from the academy is that this comes from Wallace too, right?
Mhm.
Either is one of two. So the first claim is that the Black Panther Party failed because of its internal sexist tensions. And the second kind of qualified claim is that it didn't fail because of these tensions, but it was easier or more easily subverted because of them. And so this is the kind of popular assumptions and axioms. And so I was digging through the Kennedy files in the FBI vault, man. I was able to find a correspondence between J. Edgar Hoover and the Sacramento branch of the FBI office, the field office, the special agent in charge.
Wow.
And what they were communicating is Hoover had information that there were women who recently left that branch, the Sacramento branch, and a couple of men who were upset, and they posed or they staged like a event, and they
Mhm.
upstaged the event talking about how Black Panther members did not live up, particularly the women. They said they did not live up to protecting Black women, like they said. They were very upset about it. And so Hoover wanted to know, is this true? And if it is, I want more information about this to possibly subvert this group using these tensions.
Mhm.
Well, the response from the special agent in charge at the field office, the FBI in Sacramento, is that after further investigation, they can't make any suggestions because they're not able to find any evidence of that occurring.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right. Right. Right.
So this just flies in the face of the dominant narrative. Like this is the classified conversation happening in the FBI that we can't find evidence of them doing this.
What what did Bakari say in her memoir about
Right.
what did she say as far as just how it was as being a woman in the Panthers?
Yeah, well, actually the writings of Bakari and Cleaver's wife Kathleen actually are in line with some other documents I found. So there was another deluge of documents, bunch of uh, duplicates in there. But it basically is the same story, right? So you see actual internal documents from the Chicago branch of party rules. And one of the rules is that you cannot commit a crime against any black person for any reason,
Mm,
right? There's no gender qualification. If
mhm.
you harm a black person, it is grounds for immediate expulsion.
Right.
This is what Kathleen Cleaver says, that if somebody was sexist to her, she had rules she could go to and get male members to confront them and expel them for
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
Bukhari talks about, on an individual level, there was problems of chauvinism and male sexism, but there also was problems of what she called ultra femininity, or hegemonic femininity, where women were playing into feminine gender roles because they didn't want to do work they associated men to do
Yeah. Mhm.
because they did not assign work on gender basis. So if it was your time to cook, it didn't matter if you were a man. If it's your turn to go on police patrols, it doesn't matter that you're a woman.
Mm. Right.
Right.
Right. Right.
And some
Right.
women didn't want to do it. I don't want to be outside selling newspapers all day. That's something men should do. I'm a woman. I'm gonna stay here.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Okay.
But these are
Yeah.
not the narratives you get from academics, right? Because they
No,
don't
not at
use the
all.
women who are actually in the party.
there's never any nuance or context offered. You know what I mean? Or even they
Yeah.
they ignore they won't cite certain people on it, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah. That's uh unfortunate, but we know
Yeah.
that's what they're on.
Yeah.
You know, last thing I wanted to kind of ask you about is, obviously we've got talked about savage male, um, you know, uh, uh, there's been a conversation going over about black men not going to college, and it's been made to seem as if this is a cultural issue, and not a systemic issue. And it's been obviously some really nasty things said, but like, what are your thoughts on that whole conversation about why young black men aren't going to college? I think the rate of what black men with degrees was like 22% or something like that.
Yeah.
But the rate of black women wasn't that much higher, and it seems like black people, period, aren't going to college. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I
So.
mean, even the gender divide, I think it's more noticeable with the graduate degrees
Mhm.
and professional certificates. And I noticed that wasn't brought up in the conversation either.
Mm, mhm.
Um, but you're talking about around 16 to 20% of Black people have degrees at all.
Yeah,
But I think, a lot of the professionals, I mean, some of these people are therapists and teachers. And I mean, I think it just goes back to like what Robert Allen was showing years ago, right? That there's a new internal managerial class of bourgeois Black people, right, who
yeah,
control the masses in roles that previously only white functionaries could fill,
you're right.
right? And part of their ideology that they're taught through these schools is a hatred of poor young Black men. You know what I mean? I just think that's a reflection of these deeper tensions in Western thought
Right.
itself and the fuel what fuels racism itself. But I think it looks different, So the gender differences, I think, like I said, I think even the MBA class, like the creation of this class, Alan doesn't use this language to describe it, but I definitely would. I think it was a experiment in gender social engineering in and of itself,
Mm,
because what you see is that there's always been a gap leaning toward women, Black women with education. But it becomes more extreme at the graduate and professional levels after the 70s, especially. And this is across the diaspora as well. It's a similar thing in the Caribbean islands, African Caribbeans, Black Caribbeans, and the UK from the limited data that's available. Seems that among Black diasporic populations, women go to college more. And I think this is a reflection of them being assimilated to a
mm,
certain degree in order to stalwart or stop the decolonization and Black power movements that were happening. I think Black students who skew female were assimilated selectively in a
mm.
certain type of way, and elite among them at least were assimilated in order to thwart that groundswell of influence.
Right, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. For anybody that may want to kind of learn more about some of these topics that we've talked about, do you have any book suggestions for the people? Or
Yeah, man. Yeah. I mean, I try to make some of these arguments in my dissertation.
Mhm.
It's called Thinking for the Bound and Dead. It's publicly available. Um, I think all the I think David Galula is a great guy to read. I think Orison Burton's
Absolutely. Tip of
recent
the
book was
spear.
really,
Yeah,
really good. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, you really don't see. I mean, a problem I have with a lot of these authors is that they can tell you about counterinsurgency around the world, but not about Black people in America.
yeah. Right,
It's just a
right.
huge gap.
Hmm.
That's what makes people like Burton's book really, really important. Um, but there's also different strategic manuals you can read. Small Wars Manual by the Marine Corps is public. some of these manuals you could just pick up and read yourself. A lot of this stuff is public, but
Yeah,
I got a bunch of sources in my dissertation. You can just feel free to pick out at the end of those chapters. So
no
yeah,
doubt.
man.
I'll have that link in the description for the people. So, well, again,
Well,
man, like always, my bro, it's always dope having these conversations, man. Definitely appreciate everything you do. You're highlighting something that's extremely important, that's ongoing and can help to explain our condition. Because there's obviously a lot of confusion about it. And this is what counterinsurgency does, man. And so again, man, I appreciate all the work, man. And until the next time,
all right, man. Peace, man.
peace, Jay.